Is that working now? Yes, good. I want to just, I have to sit down in a spot here, don't I? Can I just have a show of hands? I come to a future summit, and when I think about the future, I struggle to drag myself out of the pit of dark pessimism that I experience when I think about the future from an ecological point of view. And I just want to know if I'm in good company amongst the pessimists. Can I have a show of hands? Who feels optimistic about the future? And who feels pessimistic, like positively entrenched in pessimism about the future? Okay, so it's a good mix. And I sit through talks and I hear about these incredibly innovative, energizing movements and companies and ideas, and each and every one of them can create a little island of optimism. I'm optimistic about that specific thing. And whether that's healthcare, whether that's technology, even some environmental and conservation. Anyone who heard Dennis's Greening the Desert talk earlier might feel optimistic about our ability to regenerate nature. And having lived with my pessimism for more than 40 years, I now start to wonder whether all these little islands of optimism might possibly have a continent lying underneath them that is waiting to emerge. And when I look at what the young people are doing around the world today, and the energy, whether it's the climate strikes or entrepreneurship here in Romania and elsewhere, I start to be tempted to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. But let's not try to escape from the facts. We are more than 7 billion people on Earth today, and that is going to rise to 9 or 10 billion by 2050. We already consume more than the world can naturally generate, and the food system alone, left to itself following current trajectories, would take us above the emissions targets agreed in Paris. By itself, food is about to cook the planet. And that is not a great set of facts to look at. Food is by far the biggest impact that humans have on nature. It's the biggest cause of deforestation. It's by far the biggest user of fresh water. It is the single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. It is behind most of the world's species extinctions. And we are right in the middle of the mass species extinction event, number 6 on planet Earth. And this is not some future scenario. This is right now. And food consumption continues to grow. Not only that, we're being told by the big food corporations like Monsanto and Cargill, and indeed venerable institutions like the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, that what we need urgently is to double food production or increase it by 50, 60, or 70, depending on who you're listening to, a massive increase in global food production. And yet the current food system is already massively exceeding what the Earth can continue to produce indefinitely. And the problem with this as a strategy to tackle the global food problem is twofold. The first is that this strategy is the single biggest actual threat to long-term food security, because global food production is being increased year on year, and some of that is happening because of great technologies in the Netherlands and other places where productivity is going through the roof under glass and the rest of it. Some of it is happening because land in sub-Saharan Africa, which is utilized and not being used optimally, is being used more and more optimally, so there is increased productivity without increasing the footprint of agriculture. But the vast majority of global increases in food production are being achieved in the way they've always been achieved, which is extending the amount of land the world's agricultural system occupies. And that translates into deforestation in South America, deforestation in Southeast Asia, deforestation in Central Africa, and many other ways in which humans take more and more space on planet Earth, leaving less and less to natural ecosystems, which we entirely depend on for the sustainable operation of life on Earth. We are essentially undermining our ability to feed future generations, let alone leave enough space for any other species. So that's the first problem with this global strategy to double food production. The second problem with this strategy is that it's entirely wrong. We don't need to double food production. This is something of a relief if we're going to feed the 9 billion people on planet Earth. Indeed, we already produce enough now to feed 12 billion people. And the problem is that half the world consumes vastly more than is good for their own health, let alone the health of the planet. In particular, we consume vastly more meat and dairy products than is good for our own health. And this creates a huge opportunity, a win-win for the planet and also human health, if we can reduce that overconsumption. And the second area of unnecessary production is that of food waste. And Cyprian, he could have gone and eaten his lunch. I hope you will, at some point, go and feed yourself. Because you can only create the positive impact of not consuming and not over-consuming if further down the line the food has not been produced in consequence to your lack of demand. So if we stop wasting food and stop over-consuming food on a systemic level, the ultimate objective is to reduce the total demand for land and other resources currently locked into the food system. And that has to be our aim. The reason why I am absolutely confident in saying what I just said about it's not necessary, switch off the alarm bells, stop the lights flashing, we don't need to double food production by 2050 to avoid global famine, is because I have looked at the food availability data for every country on Earth, and what I found is represented in this chart. In a nutshell, what this data demonstrates is that every rich country in Western Europe and North America has already, in its shops and restaurants, available to its local population between 1.5 and 2 times the nutritional requirements of that population. So a country like the USA has twice as much food available to its population as is actually required to feed that population. That surplus either goes down the throats of an overfed population or it goes into their trash. And clearly, if we're to meet the environmental requirements of a sustainable planet, as well as good human health, that is the place to go and mine environmental benefits, not by going out and extending the agricultural frontier further and further into the world's remaining forests. So how does one tackle this bulldozer of a food system? I just showed you Cargill or Monsanto's corporate agenda. These are huge companies with gigantic power on the ground, in the lobbying offices of international institutions and national governments. It is thanks to those companies that we have deforestation in South America going absolutely wild, hand in hand, of course, with the current Brazilian administration. Well, probably the truth is that we can't. The first thing to understand about what they say we need to do is that this need, they talk about a need to feed the world, need to feed 7 billion people, we need to double food production. This need is not, in my view, reflecting in any real sense what I would describe as a need, an existential requirement, a need that we have. The kind of need that they're talking about is the kind of need that Coca-Cola has if it successfully markets to everyone in this room a Coca-Cola. In that sense, we need 150 cans of Coca-Cola to meet this demand that we've created through our successful marketing. But in no sense whatsoever do any of you need a Coca-Cola. Indeed, it's got more sugar in it than is good for you to consume in a day. And in fact, one could argue that what you need is the very opposite of that need. The need that they're talking about, in truth, is the need, and I don't blame them for this, the need for corporations to generate maximum financial return for their shareholders. Most of these companies are locked into a legal requirement to serve this need. So let's remember that the food system as we have it is not principally built on supplying healthy food to sustain the human population of Earth. That is not what the current global food system is designed to achieve. It does achieve that to some extent, but this is arguably an ancillary benefit of the primary need being met by the global food system, and that need is the need to generate maximum financial return to the corporations that are driving this food system. How do we undermine this edifice and try to create a food system that does the opposite, that does feed population with a healthy diet, that does it whilst living within planetary means? Well, the good news is that we already do know how to do food in a way that can do good to nature. Indeed, soils are the most potent way that we can get carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the ground. Indeed, that is what soil is. Soil is carbon locked into the ground. And plants annually suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and then as they rot, they put it back into the soil. Harnessing that incredible power through agriculture is, I believe, one of the most powerful tools we have to combat climate change. And if we create a food system designed to do that rather than the reverse, we have an amazing weapon on our hands. Plants also regenerate water systems. They can help to put water back into the soil rather than sucking it out. They can create habitat rather than destroy it. They certainly can produce healthy food. So the food system, done right, is our best friend. And even more potent than that, food, I believe, is one of the most powerful social tools we have. The sharing of food is something that we see universally practiced in all human societies. People come together around food. My favorite word, indeed, in English is the word companion. Com is the Latin for with, and pan is the Latin, of course, for bread. A companion, a friend, is somebody you share food with. And the power of sharing food and bringing food to create society and community, that is something we see everywhere. I bet in Romanian, being a Latin language, there is some cognate of this word companion. Do you have something like that? Was that a yes? Shout it out. What is it? Exactly, and it's copain in French and compañero in Spanish and Portuguese. Even in Greek, they have the word syntrophos, which for any Greek speakers, you know, syn is with and trophos is food, somebody you share food with. This is a universal thing. So I believe that by creating companionship around a positive food system, we can transform our food system into a nature-friendly, health-generating one instead of the reverse. I chose many years ago that kind of the vulnerable underbelly of this corporate-led food system was the subject of food waste. It is the subject that, whether you're a taxi driver in Bucharest, a CEO of a major US food corporation, or a politician at the United Nations, the idea that a third of the world's food is currently being wasted is the most easy to grasp problem that can, in and of itself, be solved in ways that improve the environment. Reducing food waste has many positive benefits. But at the same time as that practical, step-by-step improvement, it's also right at the heart of that central hypocrisy of the current dominant paradigm, the idea that we need to double food production. This food waste shows the claims of Cargill and Monsanto to be based on a lie. The idea that we waste a third of all of our food is the biggest, clearest indicator that something else is going on in the food system other than trying to generate enough food to feed the hungry. And this is where my journey started, diving into supermarket dumpsters, This is a very typical situation for any dumpster divers in the room? Somebody who's been around the back of a supermarket to have a look at what's thrown away? Okay, excellent. And have you done that here in Bucharest? Is that a no? Can you shout loudly? I can't hear you. Not in Bucharest, not in Romania. In 2 cities in Romania. Please can you speak really loudly and tell us what you saw in the dumpsters of the Romanian whatever kind of... Is that okay? Can I have audience participation at this stage? Yes, great. Stand up and tell us what you saw, please. If you don't mind.
Yeah, it's of no secret that I come from Cluj. I lead the food waste combat project there, the only one. But
cool.
Actually I started by dumpster diving into one of the biggest hypermarkets in Cluj. There was a rumor that they would throw away quite a lot of food every day, and they just leave it there in supermarket trolley for homeless to take it if they were around. So it was some sort of an illegal stuff they were doing because they're not supposed to do that. But anyway, they were just kind people, those in the warehouse that wanted to throw food away. So we heard of this. We wanted to run a test, having a community dinner just with donated food. We went there. We just had to cope with like 2 huge supermarket trolleys filled with food. So we took those and we cooked for 100 people. And it was quite easy. We only spent like, I don't know, €15 to get the additional eggs and flour to cook from that. But it was there, and afterwards they become one of our partners in donating food to the food bank. But however, the problem remains. It's very usual to have at least 50 kilos of food thrown away per day from medium-sized shop.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much for doing what you did. You brought 100, thank you. I think I heard you say that you brought 100 people around a meal. You made 100 compagne, all from food that otherwise would have been wasted. This was an environmental problem. It was in a dumpster. It was going to go and create methane in a landfill site somewhere. And instead of following that avenue, you stepped in, you pulled it out of the waste stream, and you created companionship, something beautiful. And I imagine, as the many events that I have attended and organized along these lines, over that meal, everyone sat there and said, wow, this is so delicious, it's perfectly good food. Why would anyone throw it? What can we do about it here in Romania? What can we do about it globally? Creating that fabric of conversation, of entrepreneurship. We have organized events like this all over the world, and every one of them creates sparks, and those sparks turn into organizations or just a changed food culture, greater awareness. I believe that this is the power that we can use to change the food system. Unfortunately, as I continued my journey through the food system, researching the problem of food waste, I discovered that the waste at the back of the dumpster in the supermarket is literally the tip of the iceberg of the food waste being created by the world's food supermarkets. And this is where you actually find a much, much larger quantity. It's in the fields, on the farms, all around the world, producing food for this supermarket system. This is a really typical situation, what you're seeing here. It's 1,000 tons of citrus fruit being grown in Peru. As an emerging explorer, I visited Peru with the National Geographic. They did a big magazine article about it. No, 2016, anyway, a few years ago. And these fruits are not being wasted because there's anything wrong with them. They're being wasted because they have minor skin blemishes. You can hardly see them. You need to be an expert to even spot they exist. They have no impact on the quality of the fruit or the longevity of the fruit. But the British supermarket that this grower was growing for had zero tolerance on anything that looked imperfect on the skin. And the result was a regular wastage of 1,000 tons of citrus fruit. And this is in a country, Peru, where there are hundreds of thousands of hungry people, where the water table on the west coast, the arid west coast of Peru, is going down and down and down because the agricultural export industry has boomed to export food to countries like mine and probably yours. And so they're just sucking more and more water out of the water table, to the extent that now they're planning to drill a hole through the Andes Mountains to plumb the Amazon basin, to replumb the Amazon basin, to suck water from the east, wet part of Peru, and send water that should be going into the Amazon River over to the west coast. And at the same time, they're wasting a third of the food that they're growing. And it's not, of course, just Peru. This is the same story. Bananas, these are in Ecuador. What else have I got? I think maybe I cut a long story short. So, creating positive stories, companionship, and energizing local populations around a cultural change, putting pressure on the supermarkets to change, using those insiders, those people in the supermarkets who throw away the food every day. They hate that. Everyone hates that job of chucking food into a dumpster, and everyone says to their manager, come on, can we not just give this to a charity or do something more sensible with it than chuck it in a dumpster? I know lots of people who write to me from all over the world about this problem, who have lost their jobs over it, who have started initiatives, whether formal or informal, to try and tackle it. And years ago, in fact 10 years ago, I organized the first of a large version of that event, Feeding the 5,000. We fed 5,000 people in Trafalgar Square with food that otherwise would have been wasted. I think we've got time. It's only like 2 minutes long. Can I have I think we have a video of a Feeding the 5,000 event I did a few years back, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Big Ben is sounding 12 o'clock. Welcome to Feeding the 5,000.
Well, Feeding the 5,000 is about a really good partnership between a number of organisations to really try and raise awareness of the issue of food waste, both from retailers, from consumers, from a whole range of people.
We want to feed 5,000 people, but we also want to feed you.
Oh my God, that's our future Prime Minister. Honestly, Boris Johnson serving food at Feeding the 5,000 2011. I could slip my wrist for having let him into our event. Sorry,
It's good
I
for
really
us,
apologise.
But what we have got is we've got stuff that the supermarkets say no to, the consumers say no to.
In this country, we waste so much surplus, fit for consumption food, and it should be going to people.
With our population increase, we're getting to the point that food wastage is ridiculous, especially in the UK.
Yeah, hopefully things like this will raise awareness and stop food waste in the future.
Friends of the Earth are here to demonstrate how much food that can't be used for humans can be used for animals. So we've got some live pigs that we're actually feeding the waste from apple pressing today. Visitors here today are getting to drink the apple juice, and then the pressed apples are actually being fed to our pigs as well. So it's there to demonstrate a much more efficient way of using food, so it doesn't go to waste.
16 million tonnes of food waste are being thrown away every year in Britain.
For the average family, they could save £50 a month simply by making the most of the food they buy.
The vegetables that are being used for lunch are wonky, all right? Cosmetically, there are issues, but they are fresh and very tasty.
All these carrots are not suitable for supermarkets, wrong size, wrong shape. We're just highlighting unnecessary waste of food here today, getting people to help bag stuff up. Then we can deliver it off to our charities.
I've been a freegan for 30 years. Such a crazy world that we live in at the moment, with so much food wasted and so much starvation in the other parts of the planet.
We need to all respond to this by saying, look, the global food waste scandal, whereby we waste a third of the entire world's food supply, is something that we can solve. It's causing environmental destruction, it's contributing to global hunger, but the solutions are delicious, and that involves eating and enjoying food rather than throwing it away.
Okay, so I wasted a lot of time talking about pessimism at the beginning of this talk, so I'm going to race through to the end of my presentation now. I'm going to go and do an event a bit like this one in Sofia on Saturday. I think Bucharest might be one of the only capital cities in Europe where we haven't now done a Feeding the 5,000 event, but I'm really glad that there are the indigenous alternatives okay, that's the future. So we've done them all over the world, about 50 cities. We've done disco soups. This one is one in Nairobi, campaigning on the food waste caused there in Kenya. as a result, again, of those supermarket standards. By doing this kind of high-profile, energizing, inspiring event, you can change public opinion. And public opinion is important to change, not just in order to create behavior change, but ultimately to put pressure on the companies that are running our food system and on governments that create the legislative frameworks that govern them. And that, I think, is the most important step to take, because without laws preventing the ecological damage that is currently being done by the food system, we have no hope. The kind of work that Feedback, the charity I founded, kind of built its global reputation on, was doing events like this and then taking evidence of kind of egregious instances of food waste to companies and to governments to change their system. And this is one of them. These are green beans that were being trimmed to fit into 9-centimeter punnets. And of course, beans didn't know they had to be 9 centimeters long. They grew all sorts of different lengths, 13 centimeters. And we found that even the most beautiful beans were being wasted, 20% of them, just to fit them into these punnets. So we did a big campaign on that. We got Tesco and then all the other supermarkets to change the way they were producing the beans to reduce that food waste. It's been a very powerful thing. I'll stop talking about pigs because you got that. I'm going to end on a slightly positive note, which is this is 13,000 slices of fresh bread that was being wasted by a single sandwich factory in the United Kingdom. And I saw this in 2008, and it made me really angry. It made me really sad. And I visited Pakistan in the same year, where there were people who were starving as a result of the global food price spike. In 2008, we had a massive increase in the global price for wheat as a result of demand outstripping supply. And I realized we in the West were contributing to this stretch on demand by buying food on the world market and then chucking it into our dumpsters. And there is no justification for this. I convinced this particular factory and then many others to start diverting the bread at least to livestock feed, which it did. But come on, it's bread. We should be eating this. But it wasn't until 2015 that a brewer in Brussels, Sebastian Morvan, showed me that beer was invented by the ancient Mesopotamians thousands of years ago to preserve grains that would otherwise be wasted. The inebriation that results from drinking beer is a happy ancillary benefit. It's mainly a preservation technology to create a long shelf life product. And I said, right, okay, well, I know where bread is being wasted all over the world in industrial quantities. Craft beer is a global movement, and I've spent 20 years building a food waste movement. Let's bring these three things together and launch Toast Ale. And he said, well, look, I'm a brewer in Brussels, you do that. And so I set up Toast Ale to generate profit. For 100% of our profit goes to Feedback and other charities that are fighting to change the food system. We're now brewing in about 7 different countries. We're distributed nationally in the United Kingdom. And the main purpose of Toast Ale, this is the first, do you know who this guy is? Do you have him here? Jamie Oliver? He drank the first ever bottle of Toast Ale. I'm not kidding, I hadn't tasted it myself at this point, on television. I was quite nervous. He said it was bloomin' lovely. That became the name of one of our beers. The purpose of this beer is, to take waste bread, turn it into beer, stop it being wasted. But every bottle is a message. And the message is that if we're going to save the world, we have to throw a better party than the people destroying it. We have to make it a hedonistic approach to saving the planet. Everything that we do has to be about having fun and enjoying the fruits of the earth, enjoying each other as much as we can as companions. Because it is only by putting forward that positive note, even if we have a deep, dark pessimist inside us, not letting go of that anger and that pessimism, but to upcycle it, as nature always does with death and darkness, to upcycle it into life and joy. That is our job if we want to bring about a global transformation of the world's food system and indeed the economic system as a whole. So go and have better parties and wash it down with a bottle of Toast Ale. Thank you.
That was a very inspirational. So to sum it up, beer is a food waste solution.
Absolutely. That was its original purpose.
I knew this. I never knew why I like it, but now I know. Now, if there's some of you that want to ask questions, I know Kami might want, but others as well. Yes, Mihai? I don't know you all by name. Only those that ask questions.
You need to get an artificial intelligence to just... whoa, serious feedback. Is that you or me? Or is it us?
Feedback is your organization, not mine.
No, this... Okay.
Actually, I'm also a food waste fighter along Kami there, but with an app, sort of a Too Good To Go and Karma apps. It's called Just Now, and it relates to the food that will be wasted in the retail chain. So we'll put it in discount 2, 3, 5 days before. But that's as we know it. So the food waste market, it's 7 billion in Europe, 47 billion in US.
Yeah.
And that's just 5% of the value chain. So as you said, producers are wasting the majority of that,
yeah.
And also consumers, us. What initiatives do you know in terms of producers and consumers to have, you know?
The equivalents of your app. I mean, there are so many, and you must know them. Things like Too Good To Go.
For producers
and
consumers.
If you ones that go all the way up to farmers.
Yeah, because retailers have only 5% of the waste.
Yeah, indeed. So there's a few that do this. One of the best examples that I know is not an app-based one. It's, in fact, I introduced the directors, talk about conversations over these meals that result in changes. You may have heard of Imperfect Produce in California. That is a grocery box scheme that delivers groceries to consumers' doors. They have 200,000 customers now. They're turning over $12 to $13 million a year, and they are exclusively ugly produce from producers who would otherwise be wasting them. And yeah, the directors met at Feeding the 5,000 in Oakland in 2014. I introduced them to each other. One was an entrepreneur wanting to do something similar to you. The other one had worked for food banks, finding vegetables from producers for decades and decades. And I was like, these two people can create a business, and it's been growing exponentially. There are a few others, app-based ones. Maybe if you come and talk to me afterwards, I can show you some of the other examples of it. There's a couple on the east coast of the USA whose names are currently not coming into my head, but I'm friends with all of them, and I can put you in touch.
Thank you very much. And there's one company in Austria. If you go to Vienna, most of the events that like these are actually catered by a company that is using vegetables, only vegetables that are, you know, a bit twisted.
Yeah.
The carrot is not long enough or whatever.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name now, but the food.
I can't either, but I'm in touch with them. They come to the UK.
Now,
they've even made a food waste, a bread waste beer after our one. So
it's always about beer. Now, if you're curious about what they do, don't just go online to check feedback, for example, but go on Amazon or other websites where you can probably still buy some of your books, if they're still...
Yeah, you can, I mean...
Yes, if they're not too old.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward for his third book, which he doesn't know that he's going to write, or are you going to write?
Well, at the moment, I think people need to just do what my mum does, which is watch my talks on repeat. The 1.7 million people that have watched my TED, at least 3/4 of them and my mum watching on repeat. Yeah. So this helps to kind of create the impression of people actually listening. So do that.
Good. Thank you so much. Cheers. And next time we have some beer from you. Thank you very much.
Brew it. Yeah. Thank you.